The amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment limits the opportunities in the legislation for expungement to those who are U.S. citizens. When I originally reviewed the bill, I thought it purported to be a right-on-crime bill, and I wanted to be open-minded and think through many of the points that have been made in debate today. But what I've come to learn is that this bill is actually an immigration bill in drag. And the provisions of the bill that would limit the ability to ascertain whether or not an offense had been committed by some government officials would limit the ability to decipher where there had been disqualifying offenses for immigration into the United States. For example, if a consular's office was determining whether or not to grant a visa to a non-U.S. citizen who wanted to come to the United States, they would not be able to have full access to that information. And with an immigration system right now in shambles, with a border that has been converted to a turnstile, I don't think we should make it harder for the administration of an immigration system that would stop people from coming to our country who are not U.S. citizens and who have committed otherwise disqualifying offenses. That's the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself in. Does this gentleman insist on his point of order?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
The point of order is withdrawn. I recognize myself in opposition to the amendment. This amendment is completely, frankly, absurd. The expungement provisions have nothing to do with whether someone is a citizen of the United States. The considerations behind them have nothing to do. I'm sorry, the sealing provisions have nothing to do with the citizenship of someone in the United States, and has nothing to do with immigration. If someone lawfully present in the United States commits a crime, then under the same circumstances as any citizen, his crime, record should be sealed. If his record should not be sealed, under the same considerations as any other person. If the person is unlawfully present in the United States, he should be deported. But this amendment has nothing to do with any of that. I don't understand the point of the amendment. A record should be sealed.
Chairman, yield?
Yes, I will.
Because the bill covers them. If they're if they're in the United States unlawfully and they are convicted of such a crime and they stay around for the year, they get the benefit of this bill, don't they?
Sealing does not expunge the record, and DHS can still access the record.
Well, I understand DHS, but the public can't.
Also, neither can a
The public should not be able to, under the same considerations as anybody else. And of course, if the person is undocumented, they can't legally work in any of it.
Will the chairman yield for a question?
Yes, I will.
How would a consular's office access that information under the provision that would allow the DHS to?
It allows for investigation. The answer is that the bill allows for investigations under such circumstances.
Would the chairman yield for a follow-up question? So, as the chairman reads the investigation provision, it's your belief that that provision applies to an investigation that a consular would do on an immigration matter, not necessarily an investigation into criminal conduct. I'm just trying to understand how you see the word investigation playing out practically.
Well, wait a minute. The consular office is part of the Department of State, and I wouldn't do an investigation if the country's already if the person's already in the country. DHS, however, can do such an investigation.
No, but it's just not relevant.
Yeah,
It's just not relevant.
Well, but would a consular's activity to determine this information be considered an investigation within the construct of the bill? And I ask that question because it seems...
Yes.
But it seems as though the bill, and I believe Mr. Bishop has the provision, limits that investigation to law enforcement activity. And if the consular's office is in the Department of State doing that immigration activity, it's not. It is modified by whether or not it's law enforcement.
It does not. But if you'd like an amendment to clarify that point.
But Mr. Chairman, if you look at
There's a law enforcement function within the
page
state.
7, line 15. Page 7, line 15 is where you see that it has to be a law enforcement activity, and it's only below that on page 7 at line 22.
And the State Department is able
I yield to the gentleman from
The
Rhode
State
Island.
Department has the ability to do and performs law enforcement functions. So it's not limited to just an agency, it's a law enforcement function, which would cover any law enforcement function of any department. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll yield, you are absolutely right. This has nothing to do with immigration. Don't struggle too hard to try to figure out the amendment. This is an effort to take a piece of legislation that will make communities safer by allowing people to successfully re-enter and jam in an immigration question so they can be on Fox News talking about immigration. Let's be honest. I yield back.
It's Gaetz' time, right? Oh, then I'll yield back to. Does anyone else seek recognition? For what purposes does Mr. Johnson of Louisiana seek recognition?
Strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Yield to the gentleman from Florida.
I'll assure my friends and colleagues that one does not require a right-on-crime bill to go on Fox News and talk about immigration.
Oh, we know that.
One would simply have to go to Martha's Vineyard.
We understand.
And see deportation work.
See human trafficking at
just
work. Yes, no question about it.
Efficiency.
Yes.
But back to the bill at hand. My concern is that on page 7, if you go to line 22 where it talks about the investigations, that is all shelled within what constitutes law enforcement activity. And while I heard the gentleman from Rhode Island assert that the activities of a consular when evaluating a visa request from someone from India would somehow be considered law enforcement, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's clear in the legislation. I think there's no law one is seeking to enforce. There's no criminal matter. It's a determination as to whether or not one can come in the country. I would yield to the gentleman from Rhode Island if he would like to maybe point out what I've missed there.
No, I'm happy. I think the legislation makes it clear that for law enforcement functions and determining whether or not someone is lawfully in the United States has a law enforcement component, it would be covered by the proposed legislation.
Okay, yeah, I don't think that's true. And then here's what the American people need to know about this bill now, okay? This bill is not for, the person who as a teenager made a mistake and now wants to contribute to society and we want to create a good on-ramp to a productive life. Now what the bill is it is a shield for people wanting to come to our country who are not citizens so that we don't get to know the full picture.
Will the gentleman yield I don't want you to, I'm sorry?
It's actually Mr. Johnson's.
Oh, Mr. Johnson, will you yield?
I'll yield.
Okay, just to be clear, this statute is not available for people outside of the United States. So this argument that somehow people who want to come to the United States are going to go to court and get something expunged before they arrive here, that simply isn't true. So this notion that somehow this is helping people come into the United States, not true.
Okay,
if you are outside the United States, you are not eligible to get an expungement for something that happened in the United States.
We are almost at bump stock level of misunderstanding here, my friend. There are, I know this may surprise some, but there are people who actually come to the United States, leave, and then seek to come back. So the scenario I'm describing, let's say someone from India had come to the United States, had committed an offense, availed themselves to the provisions of this bill, went back to India, wanted to return with a visa. There is no way the consular's office would be able to get that information in this bill, which means this bill is now a shield for people who are not citizens of our country, not our fellow Americans. It's about something vastly different. I'll yield back to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Yield to Ms. Bishop.
I think the gentleman from Louisiana. I'll give an example. In North Carolina on August 12, 2 illegal aliens murdered a sheriff's deputy in Wake County. It's since emerged in news that they have a brother who also is in North Carolina, also illegal, entered as an unaccompanied minor. He's been arrested for possession of ammunition by an illegal. If he had the conviction on that, as best I can read under this bill, because there are exceptions for firearm possession and there's exception for explosive materials, but this individual, this illegal, he'd be entitled to expungement of a conviction within a year for that offense, as best I can tell.
Would the gentleman yield?
It's not my time. I'll yield back to Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I think that analysis is right, and in the 1 minute I have left, I cannot help but share the data that we got this morning that should be the most alarming thing among all the conversations, and that is that we have shocking numbers. We're talking about the border here and illegals coming in. We have shocking numbers of known terrorists who are now entering the country every day.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will not. We've caught 78 this year alone, And what we all know here, all of us know,
Matter of time.
the Biden administration has no idea how many are here among the 1 million plus gotaways who've entered streamed over the border, how many terrorist cells are set up. And as this gentleman, Tom Feely, who's the former director of New York ICE Removals, New York, he said this morning, we'll never know they're here until it's too late. This is happening. Everybody knows it. Administration, Secretary Mayorkas, doing nothing about it. I'm not sure there's anything more important that we could discuss. I yield to Mr. Bishop. You have something else?
Only thing I'd add is if a bill like this